Hello and welcome to the Discover History YouTube channel, and hopefully you're having a fantastic Sunday. The weather in Worcester is absolutely brilliant, so I'm actually out in the store sorting all sorts of things out, cleaning, that sort of thing, and Helen is still updating the website, which should go live tomorrow, and we'll let you know about that one later on. Anyway, today I'm going to answer a question because I had a question sent to me recently regarding paying respects to people in the military. In other words, where does the salute come from? So I thought I'll answer that today and just give you a general look at how we have paid compliments to people in the military, but also in civilian life as well, because what usually happens is things that go on in the military then get sort of morphed into civilian life. Perfect example of that, if you look at uniforms, for example, throughout history, a uniform starts in the military and then eventually it becomes altered in some way to become civilian wear. We see it all the time. If you think about what the British Army wear today, their multi-terrain pattern, their MTP uniforms, that very light sort of multi-patterned clothing that they wear today, that's now being worn, and I see it all the time, by fishermen, in just people in general life walking around. And that's the same throughout history. If you go back to into the 1950s, for example, people were wearing leather jerkins, for example, things like that, that soldiers got issued in both World War One and then later on in World War Two. And that's the same throughout history. When you look at some of the fashions that women wore in the Regency era, most of their clothing was copied from what, for example, the Hussars and people like that were wearing. So we've always copied, and that's the same with compliments. So starting at the beginning, where does this salute come from? Well, it starts life a long, long time ago. No one fully knows exactly where, but it goes back to the military, and it went back to the age when people fought in helmets like this. Now imagine seeing a full body of people wearing helmets like that. How do you know that is a king? How do you know the person in there is a friend, a foe, that sort of thing? Well, they made attempts at identification by the wearing of heraldic devices, livery in other words. So you will find knights, for example, having a shield with their coat of arms on, and also a tabard, a long livery with the coat of arms or colours on. So you should, if you had knowledge of who's who, identify who you're fighting. And that can be said even at the Battle of Bosworth. Obviously easier then because the king was wearing a crown on his helmet, but people looked for that royal standard. So it was very difficult, if you didn't have that, to know who was inside. And therefore what knights started doing is, when they often greeted each other, they would either take their helmet off, or they would take their right hand and raise their visor. Now this bucket helm, as it's called later in history, this very early helmet, flat-topped helmet, the sort used at the Battle of Evesham, interestingly, you don't raise a visor on this one, you have to take it off. But if it had a visor on, you would literally raise your hand and fold the visor back. In other words, you are identifying yourself. You're looking at the person and saying, look, it's me. Now, if you look at that action, it's very close to the action of throwing up a salute. Interesting. So people often make that association. It goes back to when knights raised the helmet. It was also said the reason why the right hand was used is because the right hand is the sword hand. It's the hand that holds the weapon. So by raising the visor with your right hand, you are basically saying, look at me, I have no weapon in that hand. Some people also say the Romans, when they greeted people way back in ancient times, would often raise their hand and go, salve, so therefore displaying that their sword hand had no weapon in it whatsoever. But that's really the origin of the salute. That's one of the earliest ways of complimenting someone of high status. You would raise your visor, you would raise your hand, that sort of thing. However, later in history, the standard way of paying a compliment would have been doffing the hat, and that was an unbelievably popular thing to do. And at one point, especially in the Middle Ages, it was also a legal requirement. And what that used to mean is if you had a hat on, I'll just fashion this one for you here. This is my hat from the 1600s. This is the sort of hat that you could doff, and what doffing meant was you would take the crown of it or even the rim of it here and you would remove it to show respect to the person that you are greeting in front of you. Some people say it should always be done with the right hand, as I'm doing. Once again, is this to display that you have no weapon in it? But there are a few peculiarities. You can do it with a flourish, for example. You can bow down or curtsy, depending on the rank of the person. But you must always hold the hat against you or hold it facing down. The reason is this is an age where most people had things crawling in their hair, and it was said if you held it out like this, not only would you look like a beggar asking for money, it would also be displaying all the little things crawling around inside your hat. So it's important not to show that at all. And because people were not washing as regularly as they do today, by holding it out like that, that would be caked in grease anyway. Grease in dirt, not the nicest thing to be showing anyone. So as you can see, these compliments are slowly, be it raising the visor of a helmet, raising the hand in Roman terms, or doffing the hat, was something that will eventually become the salute. We're not there yet. The interesting thing, we have always paid respects to people of a higher status, and it was more common in the past to do that. So if, for example, a lower class person was walking down the street, they would usually avoid eye contact. We know how important eye contact is today, but years ago it was not a good idea to be staring at or looking into the eyes of someone of a higher status than you. When you come across a lady, for example, or when you come across a gentleman, especially in the 1600s, you are going to do that as well. And if you think about it, even into the 1950s, the age where people had been wearing hats for a very long time, people used to raise their hat like this. I used to work with someone called Seamus Kelly at the Commandery when I first started out in heritage work, and Seamus Kelly always used to wear a hat. He would wear it on a sunny day, would wear it when it was raining. He always wore a hat. Every time he went out, he wore a hat. An old style person, really. And whenever he used to meet me in town, or when I used to see him meeting ladies, for example, that he knew, he always used to do that. So it's an art form, really, that's slowly disappearing. I don't even know if anyone wears a hat and removes it like so. I know my dad always used to wear a hat, and if a funeral cortege went past, he would stop, stand, and he would take his hat off. In a way, the hat wearing traditions, the hat wearing courtesy is a disappearing thing. It's a tradition that's being lost, unfortunately. So salve, I'm greeting you. Look, I have no weapon. Strangely, I'm using my right hand here. I'm on a battlefield. I'm raising my helmet with my right hand to say, look, it's me. I'm a friend of yours. I've got no weapon in my hand. And obviously, I'm taking my hat. I'm paying compliments. I'm doffing it to you like that. It still doesn't look like a military salute, but it's getting there. Now, later on in history, hats do change, and it's down to the fact that weapon handling is altering. This is what I mean when I say a lot of the things in the military is slowly evolving into civilian life as well. Now, when we stop carrying, for example, guns on the shoulder, as in laid almost horizontal on the shoulder, or holding it in front of us, the military start carrying their weaponry right up in the shoulder, very close to their face, interestingly, when they're marching. Now, the problem is, when hats were like this, it kept knocking the hat off, putting the gun in the shoulder. So eventually, soldiers started to fold up and pin up the corners of their hat. very common in the Restoration era in the 1660s. And then over time, a second corner was pulled up until you finally come up with a tricorn. And the tricorn hat is a good hat because you can carry your weapon in the shoulder and it's not actually going to get hit. It's not going to knock your hat off. Now, I've worn these on a hot summer's day like today, and they are absolutely useless at keeping the sun off your face. When I've done an event wearing a hat like that, I usually come out, even if I've put sun cream on, with a red face. At least with a hat with a rim on it, does actually shade your face. It keeps the sun off. It's one of the reasons why sun hats today, for example, have a wide rim on them. But by the 18th century, the British Army was starting to look extremely smart. Shaving, for example, was done on a regular basis, as it still is in the British Army, saying that until recently. And it was so important to keep your uniform in good order. Soldiers in the past, especially by the 18th century, were usually paid 8p a day, and when they were paid 8p a day, they also had deductions for things like boot blacking and pipe clay, and it was to keep their uniforms nice and clean. And there were a few complaints because people carried on doffing the hat like that, and the problem with that is officers were constantly complaining that the soldiers' hats was starting to become misshapen because every 5 minutes someone doffed the hat at one person, another person walked by, a lady or another officer, you doffed your hat again, and it was really misshaping hats. And the army therefore introduced a new way of doing things. By the 18th century, soldiers were told to tap the front of their hat with their right hand, like that. So when you see a lady, when you see an officer, you do this. And that is pretty much how the removing of a helmet visor or raising the hand has slowly become what is now in the British Army the true salute. So even though this has been about a 15-minute video, that's a short 15 minutes in hundreds of years of how we get from the helmet or the hand salute up to the salute that we do today. Now, just to end on, the army have always saluted in this format, as they famously say, the longest way up, as my dad always used to tell me, and the shortest way down. But the Navy have never done it that way. The Navy has always brought their hand up with their palm facing them, never the palm out. And this is another interesting historical fact. Because the Royal Navy, especially by the age of Nelson, were going up and down rigging, and to prepare or to waterproof rigging, the ropes, for example, were covered in tar. Your average naval man years ago had black hands, and it was said it was not a nice thing to see, someone throwing up a salute or tapping their hat with a blacked, dirty hand. So they said the Royal Navy should salute like this. So the Army salute is palm out. We have clean hands in the Army, you see. And in the Royal Navy, because they've got dirty hands, they salute with the outside of their hand facing. The RAF later on does a sort of in between the two, really. But that's a little quirk of the military, shall we say. But like I said, even though they're military things, civilians also saluted. So civilians would greet a person with the doffing of the cap, but it all stems back to the military, and that's the same with fashions like clothing. So hopefully that answers the question to why or how we salute. And remember, if you've got any questions, any suggestions, this is as much your channel as it is our channel. On that note, stay safe and we'll see you soon. Bye bye.